Hi guys, DanMinigun here, bringing you a rather fanboy episode, of course related to Battlefield 1. The scope of this video is rather similar to that produced by Marbleduck back in the BF4 days, by which we'll be exploring unoccupied gameplay niches as they pertain to weapon variety. Keep in mind, this is not a weapon wishlist, more so a gameplay niche wishlist with a focus on game design first and thematics later. All I mean by this is that I'm not simply going to look at a gun and try to force it into the game, but rather explore some, let's say, a high damage SMG, which we don't really have except for the RC SMG. I will not say, oh, we need to add weapon X because it exists in real life, but rather I will just say that this gameplay niche could be occupied by a number of weapons. Usually I have pre-selected them because I have scripted this video simply because it is very complicated. Regardless, this is why we'll sometimes be referring to gameplay niches in relative terms. For example, a heavy show shot, or rather a show shot with a bigger magazine, much like what the MG 1917 is to the name Mercy. Before we go any further, we should explain the methodology to this video. All I did was create a spreadsheet featuring SimTick data and then calculated the frames to kill for both the old and speculated weapons, which we'll be taking into consideration. For those who do not know, frames to kill is a simplified time to kill that translates the standard, more recognizable time to kill, often represented in milliseconds, which is obtained by the formula you're seeing on screen. And I'm not going to go into it too much to avoid presenting too much math, because that may not be fun for everyone. The reason for doing this is both simplicity and the fact that a change in time to kill does not always equate to a faster time to kill. A classic example would be the fire rate difference on the Hewitt and Lewis, which ultimately have the same time to kill when expressed in frame to kill as opposed to the standard milliseconds time to kill. This simply because frames to kill is obtained by dividing the time to kill by the time between frames, which for a 60 Hz tick rate is 16.66 milliseconds. To avoid too much confusion, I will be showing a diagram on screen right now. Of course, the time to kill calculations is only part of what I did to make this video. The other important thing is balancing the weapons in accordance to a variety of stats, which I will also bring up a snippet of right now. In most cases, we'll be comparing the new weapon stats to stats which already exist in the game, most likely to two other weapons which serve a, well, comparable weapon niche, not necessarily the same weapon niche. Before we finally get into these weapons, these videos shall be split in separate videos simply because the video would be extremely long if I did not do so. So to start with, let's take a look at the new weapons for the Assault class. The first weapon is actually a very familiar sight and is more so a variant, but more on the lines of the auto-loading 25 versus the auto-loading 35, to which it is almost a different weapon. I am talking about the Hellriegel Experimental. Currently, there is no middle ground SMG between the slow, accurate MP18 and the fast but awkward Hellriegel. Enter the Experimental Hellriegel, which is visually the same gun but with a stick magazine. Cosmetically, it will have a different reload animation and perhaps even a different skin or model changes, other than the stick mag obviously, as envisaged in the render by Michael 4 visible on the screen right now. The advantages of this variant are very straightforward. It is a low capacity, high damage per second SMG that is very accurate. Since Experimental is a wildcard variant, we can sculpt this variant in any way we wish. My vision of it would be taking an MP18, seriously lowering its capacity to 20 rounds but upping its DPS at all ranges at a higher accuracy. In that sense, it should match the MP18 Experimental in terms of accuracy, but having the Hellriegel's damage model. There isn't much challenge to design this weapon since the awkward long reload and limited capacity relegates it to an almost skill cannon type weapon, therefore it is difficult for this gun to invalidate other choices. The tactical reload will of course be shortened, perhaps matching that of the MP18, but the slower ADS times inherent to SMGs may also need to be removed because they actually may not be necessary. So now let's take a look at the stats table. We'll be comparing it to the Hellriegel Factory, which is actually a Hellriegel Storm, and the MP18 Experimental. As you can see, the Hellriegel Experimental actually has a lower base spread matching that of the MP18 Experimental of 0.2, which is a very accurate base spread to have. It also has a lower first shot spread multiplier just to make those bursts more accurate, especially the second shot. The spread decrease actually matches that of the experimental version on the MP18, which is actually higher than the factory versions for SMGs. The rate of fire is obviously identical to that of the Hellriegel. Of course, using this gun at range will require serious burst control and target leading due to the slow velocity when compared with LMGs. It is also slower than the MP18 Experimental in terms of muzzle velocity, which is there to keep the MP18 Experimental the king of long-range SMGs. This of course excludes the Ribeiros, which I am treating separately as a carbine class, which the game actually does anyway. Overall, recoil is far lower than the Hellriegel factory and much lower than the defensive variant. The horizontal recoil value of 0.18 to the left and right is slightly higher than that of the Browning M1917 machine gun, though base spread is higher and, as I said earlier, velocity, much less the damage output, is lower at the distance, so it has no chance at invalidating other classes like the LMGs. That said, these attributes may allow the user to squeeze off long-range stabs reliably, particularly at inattentive or stationary targets such as the Sinai snipers we all know and love. Moving on to another weapon. This weapon is actually based on the idea of making a faster version of the Ribeiros in terms of fire rate. The Ribeiros, as I said earlier, is classified as a carbine in-game and is the only gun to do so other than the trench carbine, but the trench carbine functions very differently outside the damage model. The Ribeiros, classified as a carbine in-game, is an interesting derivation of the standard submachine gun. It takes the qualities of a submachine gun, or more rather the heavier submachine guns in terms of hipfire and moving accuracy, but gives the user a better damage drop-off of 4 to 6 shots to kill. This comes at the cost of higher vertical and horizontal recoil relative to the damage per second. In fact, the Ribeiro's horizontal recoil is much worse than that of the MP18, despite them sharing the same fire rate. In essence, it trades controllability in prolonged bursts and also the better hipfire found on non-heavy SMGs for a better base spread, first shot spread multiplier and better damage. Realistically, there aren't many guns from this time period that can have the excuse to feature a damage model similar to the Ribeiros, but quite frankly, this is hardly important. Nevertheless, I think a good fit for this niche would be the OVP 1918, with its excuse being that it is chambered in the 455 Webley cartridge. This is the same cartridge as the auto revolver, but it will be going significantly faster just to match the carbine roll, but it will be a slower velocity than that of the Ribeiros. The balancing challenge with this gun is rather significant, since it will be firing at 700 rounds per minute compared to the Ribeiros 550, and the extended damage range may actually interfere with other weapon classes. As such, it is quite inaccurate in prolonged bursts at medium range and will necessitate a factory variant. An experimental burst fire option could also be an interesting consideration, as this will extend the weapon's range but at the cost of a higher skill floor. A key statistic to this weapon is its negative first shot recoil multiplier, which, especially when paired with the factory variant, can provide reliable single shooting at range in a similar way to BF4's M60E4, by which tap firing the gun, or more accurately single shotting the gun, will actually lower the vertical recoil somewhat, and also at the same time will be avoiding the fairly high horizontal recoil. Now let's dive into the stats table. The rate of fire on the OVP is 700, which is faster than the Ribeiros but slower than the SMG08. The base spread matches that of the Ribeiros, which is better than the SMG08. Its first shot spread multiplier is also better, as is the case with the Ribeiros at 3, though the case may be that 4 would be a better value considering its rate of fire. The spread decrease is identical. The vertical recoil is the highest of the two, with a very high 0.76 vertical recoil matching that of the RSC SMG. The horizontal recoil, to compensate for this very high vertical recoil, is not as high as it should be for a weapon of this fire rate, but keep in mind this weapon also only has a 20 round magazine. Still, the horizontal recoil is better than that of the SMG-08, but worse than that of the Ribeiros, and the OVP will not come in an optical variant, though the experimental variant, if it is an experimental burst fire variant, will have a lower horizontal, as is the case with the MP18 experimental. As we've just said, the first shot recoil is actually negative, and the bullets to kill is the same as the Ribeiros factory, rather any Ribeiros. The velocity is slightly slower than the Ribeiros at 500 versus the Ribeiros 520, but significantly faster than almost all SMGs. And as we said earlier, the capacity is the lowest of the two, with only having access to 20 rounds. However, this reload is rather snappy. In fact, this gun in particular actually has a pump action charging animation, which is very interesting. All in all, the idea of this weapon is to give players a more assault rifle-like weapon, much like the Ribeiros is, at the expense of worse controllability, but also not having access to a bipod, but ultimately having a higher theoretical damage per second, and perhaps making it an even more versatile weapon if the player knows how to burst correctly. Moving on to something completely different is a weapon niche I would like to call the Heavy SMG UMP. As I stated earlier in the video, there is only one 3-hit kill SMG in the class, and it is a rather awkward but very fun skill cannon known as the RC SMG. Other than that, there are no show shot like weapons for the assault class, but this changes right now. Unlike the other niches, this one is built around a very specific weapon, the US prototype SMG, which holds 70 rounds and uses 45 ACP. Almost nothing is known on its rate of fire and operation. Well, the operation is known, it's simply blowback, so we are free to change around things as we see fit, though I would do so anyway. The idea is to have a 475 RPM heavy hitting heavy SMG with a damage model similar to the RC SMG, but at a much lower velocity and a steeper drop-off. Though with that being said, I have buffed the RC SMG accordingly just to make it, well, keep it relevant with this weapon's existence. In essence, it may also somewhat compete with the Ribeiros and the new OVP 1918-455, but its low velocity, SMG-like base spread and slower ADS times brings it in line with the heavy SMG category, as is the case with the SMG-08 and Hellriegel. As with all heavy SMGs, this gun will overheat. A reasonable overheat threshold would probably be 20 rounds, considering its very low fire rate and high damage per shot. The idea for this weapon is just to make a gun that is a heavy hitter, which in itself is an advantage because if you have a higher damage per shot, then it is easier to land shots without them being subject to horizontal or vertical recoil or even spread really. This is the case with the Shosho machine gun, which despite it having questionable stats on paper, ends up performing extremely well, especially when single shot. Moving on to the stats table, we'll be comparing this weapon to the SMG-08, the Hellriegel, and the newly buffed RC SMG. I will also bring up a damage drop-off graph for this because it is more complex than the other comparisons. Anyway, the Williams 45 has a low fire rate of 475, which is only slightly faster than the RC SMG. The base spread on the William is 0.3, as is the case with the other SMGs, and also the current RC SMG before my theoretical buff, and the first shot spread multiplier is 1 lower than the other heavy SMGs, but 1 or 2 worse than the RC SMG. Keep in mind that FSSM actually is better when the value is lower. Spread decrease is standard and typical of any SMG. Vertical recoil is the highest of the bunch other than the RC SMG, but horizontal is actually lower than that of the Hellriegel Storm by a significant margin. The first shot recoil multiplier is also lower, but of course the vertical recoil is higher, so this equates to similar statistics. The bullets to kill is 3 to 6. The velocity is the worst in class with 350 meters per second, which is even slower than the SMG-08 and the Hellriegel. Capacity is very high and is in between of the SMG-08 and Hellriegel. However, keeping in mind that this weapon does more damage per shot, this is actually the highest kills per mag gun you can use in the game. Since the weapon's reload system is pretty weird. It's basically a turret of 7 round magazines. The reload system, or rather the long and tactical reload, are likely much higher than those of the SMG-08 and Hellriegel, just to keep this weapon a bit more balanced. But to better understand how these weapons function with one another, we have to look at a damage drop-off graph. Let's start looking at the graph very quickly. We have 4 weapons: the Williams, the RC SMG in its buffed version, the SMG-08 and the Hellriegel. As you can see, the SMG-08, which is the white line, is overall the fastest killing gun. However, there is a significant difference between the 12 and 20 meters. Much like the show shot, the Williams 45 does not start dropping off at 12 meters, but only starts dropping off at 20 meters. This means there is a window between 12 and 20 meters where the Williams 45 will simply kill faster than the SMG-08 and especially the Hellriegel. After the 20 meter mark, the SMG-08 will simply kill faster than the William Andrews at all distances, and the Hellriegel is also slightly faster but not as much. Keep in mind though that the SMG-08 is much less accurate than the Williams and also the Hellriegel, and the fact that it does not do higher damage per shot means that each shot is exposed more to that inaccuracy. In fact, if we add the very well known MP18 to the chart area, we can see that the MP18 actually kills much lower than any of these weapons at range, but we all know that the MP18's accuracy enables it to simply dominate these guns at range, even though its theoretical time to kill is actually slower. These are theoretical time to kills assuming 100% accuracy. The higher accuracy potential a gun has, the more potential it has to express, or rather be closer to these theoretical time to kill. There's also a reason why my lovely Hewitt, despite having a very low damage per second, actually kills many things at range very easily and very quickly. Wow, this video is already 17 minutes long, and I've only just started speaking about the Hewitt. Well, anyway, I will add my final 2 assault class weapons in another video, and in the same video I will probably include some of the newer medic guns. So without further ado, this has been DanMinigun, and you've been watching a BF1 fanboyism video. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.